In this video, let's see how DGL handles isolated nodes in the graph. So what do we mean by the isolated nodes? So whenever any node is completely disconnected from the graph, that is, if you observe this node 5 don't have any incoming edges. Also this node 5 does not have any outgoing edges. So this is a isolated node in the graph. Okay. I just took the same example that we had earlier with the same number of edges, but I just added one more additional node. Earlier we had only 5 nodes. Now we have 6 nodes ranging from 0 to 5. So let's see how DGL handles these isolated nodes. Okay. So I'll just create a simple graph. Okay. So I'm just creating the graph here. So what do we pass? So we need to pass the tuple of two tensors, right? So the first is the source node IDs. Okay. So we have 8 different edges. So obviously the length of these source node IDs and destination node IDs will also be equivalent to the number of edges. So the first tensor is source node IDs. The second tensor is destination node IDs. Okay. So now let's just print the graph. Let's see what happens. So if we see the number of nodes 5 and number of edges as 8. Number of edges, yes, we have 8 edges, that's fine. But in this graph, the number of nodes are not equivalent to 5. The number of nodes are 6. So let's see the IDs. So if we print graph.nodes, we see that the IDs are ranging from 0 to 4. But it should ideally range from 0 to 5 because we have 6 different nodes in this graph. But as this is an isolated node, DGL graph method was not able to capture this because this 5 is not part of the source node IDs. Also, it is not part of the destination node IDs. So DGL does not know about this node. So how do we make DGL to handle this node? Okay, so it's very simple. So what do we do here is that so along by passing the source node IDs and destination node IDs, we can also mention the number of nodes explicitly. Okay, so I'll just mention the number of nodes as 6. Okay, we have 6 nodes, right? And you can also see the documentation here. So if we go to the parameters, we have something called number of nodes. It says the number of nodes in the graph. Okay, this is an optional parameter. So if not given, that means if we don't pass this number of nodes, okay, then it will take the largest node ID plus 1 from the data argument. So we are passing these node IDs, right? So from this node IDs, it will take the maximum node ID. Okay, it will take the maximum node ID and it will add plus 1 to that, and that will be taken as the number of nodes by default. Even before this, let's try to see whether we can see this default parameter. Okay, we already created the graph, right? So let's see the number of nodes. Graph dot, let's try to access that parameter num nodes. Okay, so okay, this is a method. I'll just call. So you can see 5. Okay, because by default it is taking 5 because the maximum integer ID here is 4 in this data, in the data input that we pass. And DGL graph method is internally adding plus 1 to the maximum ID and assigning that as the number of nodes. So now what I'll do here is that I'll explicitly pass the number of nodes as 6. Okay, I'll explicitly pass the number of nodes as 6. Now I'll print the graph. Now we can see the number of nodes as 6, and we can see again the number of nodes. It will range from 0 to 5, right? And also you can see the number of nodes. Now it will be equivalent to 6. Okay, so in case if we have any of these kind of isolated nodes with the maximum ID, then we can use the explicit parameter called number of nodes. And let's say instead of 5, let's say you have some number less than the maximum connected node. Okay, so let's say instead of 5, let's say in place of 4 we have 5, and let's say 4 is isolated. In that case we don't need to explicitly mention because the 5 will be part of this data input, right? If we have 5 in place of 4, then in place of 4 we'll be having 5. Okay, so this problem happens only this problem happens only if the isolated node having the maximum integer id. Okay, this problem occurs only if the isolated node happens to be the largest node id. Okay, otherwise, like I mentioned earlier, the dgl graph method, by default it will take the maximum id from the input and it will add +1 to that. Okay, but it's always good practice to add a number of nodes explicitly. If we already know the number of nodes, it would be good to add this explicitly. Thanks.